A black boy kicked out of car dealership. Next day, her billionaire mother's Rolls-Royce arrives. He walked in with hope, and they kicked him out without a second glance. The next morning, a Rolls-Royce pulled up to that same dealership. Not for revenge, for a reminder. Because some lessons aren't taught with anger, but with power, dignity, and a name they would never forget. This is the story of Omari Thorne, and the quiet strength that changed everything. The heavy summer air of Smyrna, Tennessee clung to everything that morning, the kind that whispered of an oncoming storm. 18-year-old Omari Thorne didn't mind. In his well-worn white Nikes and gray windbreaker, a plastic folder tucked neatly under his arm, he was focused, calm, determined. This was supposed to be a simple day. A milestone, really. He had worked hard for this moment. Graduated with honors from Murfreesboro Magnet High, earned an early acceptance to Georgia Tech's elite engineering program, and saved every dollar he could from tutoring jobs and summer internships. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He didn't care about flashy rims or horsepower. Omari just wanted something reliable, something solid, something to carry him to his future. The dealership he chose, Crest Motors, gleamed under the overcast sky, a polished promise of opportunity. As he stepped through the glass doors, holding the door open politely for a woman on her way out, Omari smiled a little to himself. This was it. At the beginning. But beginnings don't always look the way we dream. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up from her screen. "Can I help you?" she asked, flat and disinterested. Your mom produced a few folders with polite confidence. I'm here to look at a few hybrids you have listed online. I printed them out. Sonatas, Civics, under $15,000, 0 cents. The woman blinked once, coldly. Are you here with your parents? Omari smiled, undeterred. No, ma'am, I'm buying it myself. She waved vaguely toward the lot. Someone will be out shortly. But no one came. Minutes dragged by. Omari, still hopeful, ventured out toward the line of polished carved, toward his dream. That's when he met the man in the red Crestview polo, clipboard in hand but suspicion in his eyes. You lost? The man asked, his gaze sweeping over Omari's sneakers, his worn windbreaker, the color of his skin. 9, Omari said, steady, lifting the folder again. I'm here to buy a car. The man didn't even glance at the listings. This isn't a place to hang around if you're not serious. Maybe try the used lots down the road, something more in your range. There it was. Not words. Options. A dismissal so casual it almost sounded polite. Omari could have argued. He could have shouted, demanded, made a scene. Instead, he stood silent for a long heartbeat, the folder damp in his hands, the Civic glinting across the lot just out of reach. Then he turned and walked away. No fight, no spectacle, just a quiet, heavy understanding. But what the staff at Crestview Motors didn't know was this. Omari Thorne wasn't just another teenager. And he wasn't alone. At home, inside a house that smelled of lavender and black coffee, a woman sat upstairs on a Zoom call, closing million-dollar deals without raising her voice. Dr. Ayanna Thorne, his mother, was a force built from steel and grace, from years of being underestimated and dismissed herself. When she heard what had happened, she didn't scream. She didn't storm into. She made a phone call. She pulled a key from the drawer. And the next morning, the soft growl of a midnight blue Rolls-Royce floated through the streets of Smyrna like a quiet storm. When she walked into Crestview Motors, wearing a navy blue suit and a silver watch that caught the light just so, no one had to guess who she was. But they felt it. And by the time she left, Omari's name and his worth was burned into their memory forever. Not through rage, through undeniable, unstoppable presence. Because sometimes the loudest justice isn't screamed. It's shown. Session 1. Omari's arrival at Crestview Motors. The sky over Smyrna was bruising darker by the hour, heavy with a storm that hadn't yet decided if it would break. But Omari Thorne didn't notice. Not really. His old white Nikes padded quietly across the asphalt as he made his way to the glass doors of Crest Motors, clutching the blue plastic folder like a shield. Inside were printouts of 4 used hybrids he had researched obsessively: a Civic, 2 Sonatas, and a Corolla. All under $15,000, 0 cents, all meticulously vetted for mileage, reliability, and safety ratings. This wasn't just a car. It was a bridge to his future. Omari had replayed the scene in his mind all week, how he'd stride into the dealership, show them he knew exactly what he wanted, shake a few hands, sign some paperwork, and drive home with the keys to his independence. No ride for rides. No Greyhound tickets back and forth to Georgia Tech. Freedom. Earned, not given. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Omari took a breath. The lobby was brighter than he expected. Shiny tile floors, fluorescent lights humming faintly. A faint scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air. Behind the front desk, a woman tapped away on her keyboard. Blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, no makeup, business casual exhaustion in every line of her face. She didn't look up. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. Omari smiled, his best polite professional smile, and lifted the folder slightly. More than a moment. I'm here to look at a few of the hybrids you've got listed online. I printed the ones I'm interested in." The woman finally glanced up and paused. Omari felt the shift, instantly. Not in her words, in her eyes. Her gaze flicked briefly but unmistakably over his gray windbreaker, his worn shoes, the cheap blue folder. Her mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly. "You here with your parents?" The words hit harder than they should have. Omari kept smiling. "No, ma'am. I'm buying it myself." A beat. Then she gave a tight, forced smile and waved vaguely toward the lot. "Someone will be out shortly." He thanked her, because that's what you're supposed to do, and stepped aside, tucking himself into the corner by the glass doors, trying not to take up too much space. 5 minutes passed. 10. Outside, beyond the tinted glass, rows of cars shimmered under the heavy sky, each one gleaming, full of unspoken promises. Still, no one came. Omari shifted from foot to foot, then finally decided to take the initiative. He stepped outside, folder in hand, toward the silver Civic he had been eyeing all week. He was halfway across the lot when he heard footsteps approaching. Quick, clipped. A man in slacks and a red Crest Motors polo intercepted him, clipboard in hand. "You lost?" the man asked. It wasn't curious. It wasn't kind. It was suspicion, sharp and immediate, like a knife drawn without warning. Omari's chest tightened. "No worry," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm here for a car." He lifted the folder again, offering it like proof. Like permission. The man didn't even glance at it. He didn't have to. He had already decided. "Well," the man said, shifting his weight, "this isn't really a place to hang around unless you're serious. We've had incidents lately." "Psychins?" Omari echoed, confused. "I'm coming around, taking pictures, causing problems," the man said with a shrug. "You understand." Omari swallowed hard. He understood. More than the man realized. "I'm not taking pictures," Omari said quietly. "I'm here to buy. I printed out the listings, I talked to my bank, I'm paying cash." He heard his own voice, calm, clear, factual, and hated how defensive it sounded anyway. The salesman gave a short, fake chuckle. "Maybe come back with a parent or someone who can talk financing. We're kind of busy today." "I don't need financing," Omari said, a thread of frustration breaking through. "I'm pre-approved. I just want a test drive." The man backed up a step, raising both hands like he was warding off a problem. "I'm not trying to be rude, all right? Just maybe check one of the used lots down the road. They might have something more in your range." "The range?" The words dropped like stones into Omari's stomach. For a long, burning second, he just stood there. Not angry. Not shouting. Just absorbing. He glanced once, just once, at the Civic. A dream he had carried so carefully. Then he nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. And he walked away. The drive home was silent. Omari didn't blast music, didn't call a friend, didn't even let himself cry. He just drove the long way back, past the library where he used to read on rainy afternoons, past the park where he used to race Elijah on their second-hand bikes. Everything familiar looked a little different now, like someone had shifted the ground under his feet. When he pulled into his driveway, the drizzle had started, a slow, whispering rain that blurred the world behind the glass. Inside, the house smelled like it always did, lavender and black coffee. Safe. He slipped off his shoes at the door, moved through the kitchen on autopilot, poured himself a glass of water. Upstairs, he could hear the low, rhythmic sound of his mother's voice on a conference call. Cool, professional, unshakable. To Dr. Ayanna Thorne, his mother. To Zenker. When she came downstairs later that evening, Omari was sitting on the couch, laptop open, folder by his side. He didn't look up right away. "Find anything you liked?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then shrugged. "I went to Crestview. You test drive anything?" He shook his head, almost casually. "I told me to come back with a parent." He said it like it was nothing, like he was reading from a grocery list. Ayanna didn't respond immediately. She just watched him, sharp, measuring. "Would say anything else?" she asked, her voice still mild. "Anything really?" He shrugged again, just kinda treated me like I didn't belong. The words, so simple, so heartbreakingly resigned, hung between them. Ayanna leaned forward and rested her hand on his knee for a moment, a small, grounding gesture. Then she stood and began putting away the dishes, her movements careful and precise. But her mind was elsewhere. Omari didn't know it yet. But at that very moment, quietly, calmly, Dr. Ayanna Thorne was already planning exactly how to remind Crestview Motors who they had turned away. And this time, no one would be able to look past the truth. Not because she raised her voice, because she would show them the power of presidents and the cost of small-mindedness. The storm outside thickened, the air heavy and waiting. Inside the house, a different kind of storm was brewing. Silent, sure, unstoppable. Tomorrow, Crestview Motors would learn something they should have known all along. You cannot measure a man's worth by his shoes, or his clothes, or the color of his skin. You measure it by the dreams he carries. And some dreams are too powerful to be dismissed. Mission 2. Dr. Ayanna Thorne's quiet power move. Morning in Smyrna cracked open with a muted silver light. The rain had passed overnight, leaving puddles in the streets, tiny mirrors scattered across the asphalt. Inside her home office, Dr. Ayanna Thorne stood at the window, a fresh cup of black coffee in hand. Her navy blue suit was immaculate, every button fastened. On her desk, a single item sat ready, a matte black business card embossed with her name in silver. Dr. Ayanna Thorne, CEO Oratoric Biolabs. Her gaze dropped to her phone one last time. No missed calls from Omari. No requests for intervention. Because he hadn't asked her to fix this. Because her son, raised to be resilient, had already decided to move on. But there are moments, rare crystalline moments, when a mother knows silence is surrender. And Ayanna had taught Omari better than that. So today, she wasn't moving for revenge. She was moving for something bigger. To remind her. She took a long, slow sip of her coffee, then picked up her keys from the tray by the door, the ones labeled RR. The Rolls-Royce Dawn sat in the garage like a sleeping dragon, deep midnight blue paint so polished it reflected the world around it. Silver accents gleamed like quiet armor. It wasn't her daily car. It wasn't practical. It wasn't even comfortable for grocery runs. But it was perfect for today. Because sometimes, the world needed to be reminded, with visuals, not just words, what overlooked potential looked like once it grew into unstoppable success. At precisely 9:27 a.m., the glass doors of Crestview Motors whooshed open again. Heads barely lifted at first. It was just another day. Just another customer. Until the receptionist, same woman from the day before, noticed the car. The Rolls-Royce glinted under the dealership awning, its presence almost absurd against the backdrop of mid-range sedans and compact SUVs. Then she noticed the woman stepping out. Ayanna Thorne didn't have to speak to command attention. She wore power like a second skin. Not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable. Her heels clicked softly against the tile as she crossed the lobby, a navy blue blur of cool, composed momentum. The receptionist scrambled to stand. "Good morning, ma'am," she said, voice a pitch higher than usual. "Can I help you? Are you here for a service appointment?" Ayanna set her bag on the counter, movements precise, almost surgical. "Now," she said smoothly, "I'd like to speak to the manager." The woman blinked, flustered, and quickly dialed an extension. A minute later, a man appeared, mid-40s, Bluetooth still nestled in one ear, trying to paste on his best professional under-pressure smile. Dan Grissom, general manager of Crest Motors. He extended his hand. "Good morning. I'm Dan. How can I help you today?" Ayanna didn't shake it. Instead, she reached into her bag and placed something on the counter between them. A worn, damp folder, the same blue plastic folder Omari had carried. She tapped it once, gently. "You had an interaction yesterday with my son," she said, voice even. 18 years old, black, wore a windbreaker, had these listings printed out. Dan's smile faltered. "I meet a lot of customers," he said cautiously. "There might have been some misunderstanding." "It was no misunderstanding," Ayanna interrupted, her tone slicing clean through the excuses. "He came to buy. You treated him like he didn't belong." Dan exhaled slowly, hands fidgeting with the edge of his clipboard. "I'm sorry he felt that way. Maybe he could come back today. I'd be happy to personally walk him through." Ayanna lifted a single hand. "Won't be necessary." Dan blinked, unsure. "Then how can I make this right?" She picked up one of the printed listings from Omari's folder, a Civic, and held it up between them. "Your staff told him this was out of his range," she said quietly. "You made a decision about him based on what you saw, not what he brought." The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. Truth has a way of cutting deeper when it's whispered. "You didn't know his name," she continued. "You didn't care to ask." Dan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ayanna reached back into her bag and placed her business card on top of the folder. It gleamed under the dealership lights like a quiet threat. "I'm not here for an apology," she said. "I'm not here for a discount. I don't need anything from you." Dan looked down at the card, then up at the Rolls-Royce outside. Realization crashed into him in slow, visible waves. "I came here," Ayanna said softly, "so the next time a young man walks through your door, prepared, respectful, ready, you'll remember this." She picked up her bag, adjusting it over her shoulder, and turned for the door. Halfway there, she paused. "Oh," she said, almost as an afterthought. "The car outside." Dan nodded stiffly. "We're for sale," she said, smiling faintly. "Just a visual aid." And with that, outside, Ayanna slid behind the wheel, started the engine with a quiet purr, and pulled away without a second glance. Inside, the receptionist stared at the door. Another salesman, Chris, red polo, clipboard still in hand, muttered to Dan. "Was that the kid's mom from yesterday?" Dan didn't answer. He just stood there, heart pounding, realizing they hadn't just turned away a kid with a folder. They had turned away legacy, excellence, potential, and he had seen it too late. Across town, Omari was still asleep. He didn't know about the Rolls-Royce. He didn't know about the conversation that had sent ripples through Crest Motors. He didn't need to, because Ayanna hadn't done it to make a scene. She had done it to make a mark. On their minds, on their assumptions, on their blind spot. Not for vengeance. For future Omaris. For every young black man who would walk into a room and deserve to be seen in full. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. And clarity, once shown, can never be unseen. Mission 3. The internal fallout at Crestview Motors. The automatic doors at Crestview Motors slid shut behind Dr. Ayanna Thorne, leaving an echo that no one inside could quite escape. For a long moment, the lobby stood frozen. The receptionist stared at her monitor without typing. Chris, the salesman in the red polo, and Dan Grissom, general manager for the past 9 years, just stood there. The weight of what had just happened pressed down harder than the humid air outside. It wasn't anger he felt. It wasn't fear. It was something far worse. And recognition. Recognition that everything he had worked to polish, the image, the sales numbers, the customer-first slogans plastered across the website, had just cracked wide open. Because when faced with real opportunity, when faced with real preparation, they hadn't seen a client. They had seen a stereotype, and they had turned him away. Dan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. His Bluetooth earpiece beeped. Someone was calling, but he ignored it. The receptionist cleared her throat nervously. Should I call the backlot team? Tell them she left? Dan shook his head. No, he said quietly. Leave it. Chris hung by the front desk, trying and failing to look busy. Finally, Dan turned to him. You remember that kid yesterday? Dan asked, his voice low but sharp. But Chris scratched the back of his neck. The one hanging around the Civic. Looked like he didn't have? He stopped himself, too late. Dan's jaw tightened. It wasn't hanging around. He came with paperwork, pre-approved financing. Chris blinked, the realization slow to settle. He looked. You looked like what? Dan snapped. Chris opened his mouth. Closed it. Dan shook his head, the anger simmering under his skin now. Not at the kid. At himself. The culture he had let grow like mold under his nose. He had been so focused on quarterly targets, upselling warranties, pushing volume. He hadn't noticed the slow, invisible rot. The way staff sized up customers before they spoke. The way they made gut calls on who was worth their time. The assumptions baked into every forced smile. And now, it was all in the open. Thanks to a mother who didn't raise her voice, didn't call the press, didn't demand headlines. It just showed up, and showed them everything they refused to see. By noon, the atmosphere inside Crestview Motors had shifted from stunned silence to a tight, uneasy buzz. But Dan canceled his afternoon meetings. He pulled the senior sales staff into a closed-door session. No agenda, no pleasantries. The team shuffled into the glass-walled conference room, sensing something different this time. Chris kept his head down. The others, Melissa, Brent, and Tony, sat straighter than usual. Dan closed the door quietly behind him and stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. For a beat, he just looked at them and measured them. Finally, he spoke. What happened yesterday with that young man, he said, voice low, and silence. Of all of us. Melissa shifted in her seat. Brent frowned slightly. Tony stared at his hands. But Dan continued, pacing slowly. We walked in prepared, knew exactly what he wanted, could have paid cash on the spot, and we treated him like a problem before he even spoke. He stopped, pinning each of them with his gaze. That's not a customer service issue, that's a values issue. Chris muttered under his breath. Wasn't like we. Exactly like we, Dan cut in sharply. Exactly. Another heavy pause. You know what the worst part is, Dan said, softer now. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't cause a scene. He just accepted it, like he was used to it. That sank deeper than any accusation. They could excuse 1,000 angry customers. But quiet resignation. That was harder to ignore. Dan stepped back, hands on his hips. I'm not asking for a PR cleanup. I'm not asking for a token apology. He leaned forward slightly, voice tightening. I'm telling you, this changes now, starting today. For the next hour, Dan laid out a new directive. Auditory bias training. New protocols for greeting walk-ins. Accountability for every interaction, logged and reviewed. And perhaps most important, shift in mindset. See the person, not the clothes, not the skin, not the assumptions. Because opportunity didn't always walk in wearing a suit and a Rolex. Sometimes it walked in with scuffed sneakers and a dream. And if they couldn't recognize that, they didn't deserve the business. By the time the meeting ended, the staff filed out slowly, heads down, absorbing the shift. Chris lingered near the door. Hey, Dan? He said awkwardly. Dan looked up. I get it, Chris mumbled. I mean, I didn't before, but yeah, I get it now. Dan didn't say good or thank you. He just nodded once. Because understanding wasn't a favor. It was the bare minimum. Meanwhile, across town, in a much quieter kitchen, Omari sat at the table with his laptop open, scrolling through new dealership listings. He had no idea what had just unfolded at Crestview Motors. No idea that his quiet dignity had cracked open a conversation bigger than he could have imagined. And that was fine. Omari didn't need applause. He didn't need validation. He needed a car. He needed a future, and he had both waiting for him. Back at Crestview Motors, Dan stood by the front windows, staring out at the lot. The Civic, Omari's Civic, sat gleaming under the watery afternoon sun, detailed and polished until it shone. It was ready, the way it should have been from. Dan didn't know if Omari would ever come back. Completely not. It wasn't about winning him back anymore. It was about never making another young man feel invisible again. About building something better. One quiet, necessary step at a time. Because dignity, once lost, isn't reclaimed with discounts or deals. It's reclaimed through change. Through showing up differently. Through making sure the next time opportunity walks in, it's recognized and welcomed, not overlooked. Dan reached into his pocket, pulled out a pen, and scribbled 3 words across the corner of his desk calendar. Earn it back. Not with words, but with actions. With better choices. Starting now.
Session 4. Omari's new beginning at a different dealership. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows in soft gold, painting the hardwood floors with wide strokes of warmth. Omari Thorne sat at the table, scrolling slowly through dealership listings on his laptop, a glass of orange juice sweating in the heat beside him. No panic. The rejection at Crestview Motors still clung to him in ways he couldn't quite name. Not an open wound, but something quieter. Something heavier. But Omari had learned something important, without anyone ever needing to say it aloud. When the door slams shut, you don't knock harder. You thought, oh, another door. And you walk through it standing tall. He clicked on a new dealer. Ayanna. Locally owned. Go flash. But the reviews said a lot. They treated my daughter like a real buyer even though she was only 19. No pressure, no judgment. It was worth a shot. Omari took a breath and clicked the chat icon at the bottom of the page. A small box popped up. Hi there, how can we help you today? He typed, interested in a used Sonata or Civic, under $15,000, 0 cents. Have cash ready, available for test drive. He half expected the silence he'd gotten before. But within 30 seconds a response, good morning Omari, thanks for reaching out. Yes, we have 3 Sonatas and 2 Civics available. When would you like to come in? We'll have the keys ready. Omari stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because it was extraordinary, Because it should have been ordinary all along. He typed back. Today, around noon. Perfect. We'll see you then. Just ask for Ben. Omari closed the laptop, a small, almost reluctant smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Maybe the world wasn't all walls. Maybe there were still doors that opened. By 11:45 AZ Mahimag Omari was pulling into the lot at Redwood Auto Group. It wasn't much to look at. No marble floors, no luxury banners flapping in the breeze. Just a handful of clean, honest rows of cars, a small glass-fronted office, and a few sun-faded flags dancing half-heartedly in the wind. But something about it felt different. Right. He stepped out of his car, folder still tucked under his arm, old habit now, and made his way toward the front doors. He opened before he could reach for the handle. A man in his early 30s stepped out, short sleeves rolled up, a genuine grin on his face. "You must be Omari," the man said, offering his hand without hesitation. Omari blinked once, surprised, then shook it. "Yeah, you're Ben? That's me. Thanks for coming in, man. You ready to see some cars?" Omari nodded, cautious but hopeful. Ben didn't waste time. He didn't glance at Omari's sneakers. He didn't ask if he was alone. He didn't ask if his parents were coming. Instead, he pulled out a clipboard. "All right, I pulled up the 3 Sonatas and the Civics you mentioned. Good choices, by the way. Bulletproof engines on these." Omari chuckled softly. It felt normal. He followed Ben across the lot, the summer sun beating down in thick waves. They stopped in front of a 2018 Hyundai Sonata, silver, spotless, with a fresh inspection sticker gleaming on the windshield. "First up," Ben said, tossing him the keys with a casual underhand throw. "Take a look inside. Tell me what you think." Omari caught the keys one-handed, a small, stupid thrill sparking through his chest. Someone trusted him. Without hesitation. Without doubt. He slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled clean, not chemical, just well kept. A still firm dashboard, simple and unfussy. He gripped the steering wheel, thumb brushing over the stitching. It wasn't a Rolls. It wasn't flashy. But it was solid. Real. It was his beginning. The test drive was short, a lazy loop around the block, a few highway merges. The Sonata handled smooth, steady, quiet. No drama. Exactly what he needed. But when they pulled back into the lot, Ben waited until Omari cut the engine, then leaned against the open door. Omari smiled, a real smile this time, not the cautious one he had learned to wear. "I like it." Ben clapped his hands once. "Awesome. You want to talk number?" Omari nodded, pulling his folder from the passenger seat. Ben raised an eyebrow, impressed. He came prepared. "Always," Omari said simply. They sat across from each other at a small desk inside. Ben flipped through the listing Omari had printed. "Okay," he said, tapping his pen. "List price is $13,500, 0 cents. You're paying cash, right?" Omari nodded again, pulling out the letter from his bank confirming his account balance. Ben skimmed it, nodded appreciably. "I can knock a few hundred off for you, save you some paperwork fees. Let's call it $13,100, 0 cents. Sound fair?" Omari blinked. No haggling. No condescension. Just a deal. Clean and respectful. "Yeah," Maurice said, feeling something lift in his chest. "That sounds good." Ben grinned and slid the paperwork across the desk. Within an hour, Omari was standing outside, a fresh key fob in his hand, watching the silver Sonata wink in the sunlight. It was his. Every inch of it. Not a gift. Not a favor. Earned. That evening, back home, Omari pulled into the driveway slowly, savoring every second. From the porch, his mother looked up from her tablet, watching him. Ayanna didn't say anything at first. He just watched him climb out of the car, toss the keys lightly in his hand and lean against the hood like he had always belonged there. He crossed the lawn, smiling that small, new car smell, Ayanna teased lightly. Yeah, Omari said, and no weird energy. Ayanna nodded, understanding everything he wasn't saying. You like it? He paused, then added almost shyly. Thanks for. Ayanna closed her tablet and stood, smoothing her hands down her slacks. You thanked me, she said softly, by not letting them tell you who you are. Omari swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Then he smiled wider, more sure of himself than he had felt in days. Maybe years. Maybe ever. And somewhere deep inside, something stitched itself back together. Quietly. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with fanfare or fireworks. Sometimes it comes with a set of car keys, a handshake without judgment, and the simple, radical act of being seen. Omari didn't just drive away with a car that day. He drove away with something far more powerful. The unshakable knowledge that not one person gets to define his worth but himself. Session 5, Ayanna's reflection on legacy and resilience. That evening, after Omari had gone upstairs, humming under his breath as he unpacked the few things he'd moved into the glove box of his new car, Ayanna Thorne sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet now, wrapped in the soft blue hush of twilight. She turned her coffee mug slowly in her hands, not drinking, just thinking, her mind reaching back to years she rarely let herself revisit. The years when success wasn't just unlikely, it was almost unthinkable. Because before there was the Rolls-Royce, before there was the polished Navy suit, before there were conference calls and CEO titles, it was a girl sitting on the cracked vinyl seats of a crowded public bus in Birmingham, Alabama. A girl with a second-hand backpack too big for her small frame. A girl who kept her eyes on the floor because every time she looked up, the world reminded her she wasn't meant to belong. Ayanna remembered the cafeteria line, the sharp smell of overcooked vegetables. The way her classmates whispered when she pulled out her reduced lunch card, flashing it like a scarlet letter she had no way to hide. He remembered teachers who smiled too widely when she answered questions, as if surprised she could. She remembered the neighbor who clutched her purse tighter when Ayanna and her mother passed by, even though her mother was wearing scrubs after a 12-hour cleaning shift at the hospital. But more than anything, she remembered the feeling that followed her everywhere. You have to be twice as good, twice as careful, just to be allowed inside. And sometimes even that wasn't enough. Ayanna's hands tightened around the coffee mug as another memory floated up, unbidden. She was 24, freshly minted with her PhD in biomedical sciences, the youngest in her graduating class, the only black woman. She had walked into her first big job interview at a pharmaceutical lab in Columbus, Ohio, wearing her best suit, still a little too loose, still a little too plain, and sat in the reception area waiting. A man in a rumpled lab coat walked by, glanced at her once, and muttered under his breath to the secretary. The interns are starting young these days. He hadn't even looked twice. He hadn't considered that she might be the lead candidate. He hadn't seen her at all. And that moment stayed with her. Through every grant proposal rejected without reason. Through every board meeting where her ideas were credited to someone else. Through every casual insult dressed up as surprise. You're so articulate. You're so polished. You're not what we expected. Uzanda learned to react. Not because she didn't feel the sting. She did because she understood the game better than they thought. They could underestimate her. They just couldn't outwork her. She had built Oratech Biolabs from the ground up. No handouts, no shortcuts. Every success, every breakthrough, every contract signed under her name was a stone laid against the tide, trying to wash her away. And when Omari was born, tiny, fierce with wide eyes that seemed to study the world before trusting it, Ayanna had sworn two silent promises. First, that he would never doubt his own brilliance, and second, that the world's blindness would never define him. Not if she had anything to say about it. Why, she had taught him to fix things, not replace them. To build IKEA shelves without losing his patience. To shake hands firmly and look people in the eye. To listen twice before speaking once. To volunteer on weekends at free clinics, even when his friends slept in. Because Ayanna didn't want Omari to just succeed. He wanted him to be rooting, unshakable, able to bend but never break. But sitting there now, alone with the cooling coffee, Ayanna realized something else. No matter how much she prepared him, no matter how carefully she taught him, the world would still try to make him feel small. Like it had tried with her. Like it had succeeded, they went. And that day at Crestview Motor, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reminder that even in 2025, with all his preparation, all his grace, all his brilliance, there would still be doors closed to Omari before he even knocked. And yet, he hadn't let it break him. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't pleaded. He hadn't begged for recognition. He had gathered his pride quietly, tucked it under his arm and walked out. The same way she had so many times before. Ayanna smiled then, small and sad and proud all at once. He pulled her planner toward her and slipped out the small envelope she had received earlier that week, the one from Crestview Motors. The simple white card inside. "You are doing better now because someone reminded us why we have to. Thank you. Crestview Motors." He didn't frame it. He didn't display it. Instead, she slid it into the back pocket of her planner, a silent reminder, tucked close but never flaunted. Because this wasn't about public victories. It wasn't about applause. It was about making sure the next Omari, the next girl with a backpack too big and a heart too hopeful, walked into a room, not despite who they were, but because of it. Upstairs, Ayanna heard the soft creak of Omari's bedroom door, the muffled sound of him moving around gathering his things, getting ready for tomorrow, for the next chapter. He closed her planner, stood slowly, and crossed the kitchen toward the stairs. She paused at the bottom, looking up. "Hey," she called gently. Omari leaned over the banister, grinning. "Yeah, Ma?" She smiled up at him, pride shining through her fatigue. "You ready?" Omari's smile deepened, sure and steady. "Oh," and in that simple word Ayanna heard everything she needed. Resilience. Oh, legacy. Not perfect. Not painless. But enduring. Because the greatest inheritance she could ever leave his son wasn't money or status. It was the ability to stand tall, even when the ground tried to crumble beneath him. And Omari was already carrying it forward. Session 6, the unexpected call that changes everything. The following Thursday afternoon unfolded like any other at the Thorne house. The sun hung low and heavy over Smyrna, painting the sidewalks and rooftops with a golden haze. In the kitchen, Ayanna sat with her laptop open, a grant proposal half finished, a pot of coffee brewing in the background. It was quiet, good quiet. The kind she had fought years to build. The kind she'd gotten to foreground. She was mid-sentence editing a paragraph about synthetic blood cell adaptation when her phone buzzed against the counter. Unnoting, she almost let it go to voicemail. But something, a flicker of instinct sharpened over years, made her pick it up. "Dr. Thorne," she answered, cool and even. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make her wonder if it was a robocall. "Good afternoon, Doctor. This is Dan Grissom, from Crestview Motors." Ayanna didn't say anything right away. Dan cleared his throat awkwardly. "I know you didn't ask for a call, and I know you didn't come to us looking for anything, but I just wanted you to know." He trailed off, then regrouped. "We heard you," he said finally. "We really did." Ayanna leaned back slightly in her chair, folding one arm across her waist. "I see," she said neutrally. Dan exhaled into the receiver, the sound of a man trying to navigate a conversation without a map. "We've been doing some internal work," he continued. "Mandatory bias training started this week, and we're restructuring how we greet and process all walk-ins." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Ayanna's mouth. Dan rushed on. And next month we're setting up a mentorship program, pairing experienced staff with young buyers who want help learning about cars and financing. Not because they need help necessarily, but because everyone deserves respect while learning. Ayanna let the words settle between them. He wasn't someone who needed validation. But truth, when spoken plainly, was still worth acknowledging. "And what prompted all that, Mr. Grissom?" she asked quietly. Another pause. Finally, Dan said the words without flinching. "Your son." Ayanna closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of it. "He didn't even argue," Dan said, voice rougher now. "He just left, quietly, with dignity. Another And the thing that stuck with me was that he expected it, like it wasn't even new." Ayanna's throat tightened slightly. Dan continued, "I wanted you to know, we're trying to be better, not because we're afraid of bad press, not because we're covering ourselves. Rather because someone made us see it. Because we missed someone we shouldn't have missed." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The ticking of the kitchen clock grew loud in the silence. Finally, "I appreciate the call." Dan seemed to take that for the gift it was. "And if your son ever needs anything down the road, whether it's advice, service, anything, he's got a contact here now, personal line." Ayanna allowed herself a small smile. "I'll let him know," she said. Dan hesitated, then added, "He left more of an impact than he probably knows." With that, he thanked her again, politely, sincerely, and hung up. Ayanna set the phone down gently. She sat there for a long time, staring at the half-finished grant proposal on her laptop, but not really seeing it. Outside, the late afternoon breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's lawnmower hummed. He thought about legacy, about how real change, the kind that sticks, doesn't always come from shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes from quiet refusal, from walking away without bitterness, but without permission either, from standing so solid in who you are that the world has no choice but to recalibrate itself around you. Omari had done that. Not by fighting, but by being undeniably himself. Later that evening, when Omari came down to the kitchen for dinner, Ayanna caught him at the fridge pulling out a Gatorade. "Got a minute?" she asked casually. Omari turned, one eyebrow raised. "Sure, what's up?" She leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "I got a call today." He frowned slightly. "From who?" "Russia Motor." Omari straightened up, his entire body tensing instinctively. "What did they want?" Ayanna shrugged lightly. "It told me they're changing some things. Training, mentorship programs, new processes for greeting walk-ins." Omari blinked, caught off guard. "You actually said that?" "They did," Ayanna confessed. "And they said it because of you." Omari set the Gatorade down slowly, processing. "I didn't even do anything," he said, almost bewildered. Ayanna smiled. "He did everything." He shook his head, a quiet laugh escaping. "I just left. I didn't even argue." "Exactly," Ayanna said softly. "You didn't need to raise your voice. You didn't need to prove anything." He stepped closer, reaching out to rest a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You were already enough. You are enough." Omari swallowed hard, the emotion flashing through him too fast to hide. He nodded a little too quickly. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Yeah, I know." And for the first time, Ayanna saw it, the understanding settling deep into him, not just intellectually but at the level where armor is forged. He knew now. His worth wasn't negotiation. It wasn't a debate. It simply was. And no rejection, no dealership, no whisper, no glance could take that away. After dinner, Ayanna sat on the back porch, a worn novel open in her lap, though she wasn't really reading. Inside, she could hear Omari laughing over a video call with his cousin Elijah, talking about future road trips, summer plans, maybe a visit to Georgia Tech's campus before classes started. Unweighted. Right. Ayanna smiled to herself, closing her eyes against the soft evening breeze. They hadn't just weathered a storm, they had built a shelter from it. And someday, long after Crestview Motors forgot the embarrassment and moved on, Omari would still carry what truly mattered. Not anger, not bitterness, clarity, and the quiet, undeniable power of knowing exactly who he was. Session 7. A letter of gratitude from an unexpected source. It was a Sunday morning when Godota arrived. Not an email, not a text. An actual envelope, handwritten, slightly crooked, with a forever stamp pressed into the corner. Omari almost tossed it aside. Most of the mail that came for him was junk: college flyers, credit card offers, catalogs he never asked for. But something about this envelope made him pause. The handwriting wasn't polished, but it was careful, intentional, and it was addressed simply to Omari Thorne, Smyrna, TA. No business logos, no return address. Just a small, quiet message, waiting to be opened. He slid his thumb under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly in thirds. At the top, in a slanted scrawl, it read, "I don't know if you'll even read this, but I needed to say it anyway." Omari frowned slightly, curiosity pulling him deeper. He read on, "My name is Chris. I work at Crestview Motors. I'm one of the people who didn't see you the way I should have." Omari's stomach tightened instinctively, but he kept reading. It was the salesman in the red polo. It was the guy who thought he knew everything the second you walked through the door. And I was wrong. There was a heavy pause in the way the words were written, even if they were silent on the page. He left. The manager made his sit down and really talk about what happened. Not just you. All the ways we decide who's worth our time before they even say a word. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't pretty. But it was true. Omari leaned back in his chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. He didn't know what he had expected, but it hadn't been this. "You didn't owe us anything. You could have yelled. You could have blasted us online. You could have made it ugly. But you didn't. You just yelled." And somehow that hit harder than any complaint ever could have. Omari swallowed hard. The house was silent except for the low hum of the fridge, but the words seemed to echo in the room. He went home that night and really thought about it. About how many people had probably treated like that without even noticing. About all the chances he missed to actually see someone. It shook me. More than I want to admit. Omari felt something shift deep in his chest. Something he hadn't realized he was holding on to since the day at Crestview. A knot of quiet hurt, slow and deep. And somehow, this letter, unexpected and unasked for, lucid just a little. I started volunteering this week at a local mentorship program for first-gen college students, helping them learn about car financing, maintenance, insurance, things nobody ever teaches, unless you already have the connections. If it matters to you, but it matters to me. Because you didn't just walk away that day. You made me want to walk differently too. There was no dramatic ending. No grand apology. Just a closing line written in a slightly shakier hand. Thank you, Omari. Not just for what you carry, but for how you carry it. No signature. No full name. Chris. The man in the red polo. The man who had looked at Omari once and missed everything he was. Until now. Omari folded the letter slowly, his hand steady, his breath catching somewhere between his ribs. He sat there for a long while, staring at the kitchen wall, seeing nothing and everything all at once. It would have been easy to dismiss it. To say it didn't change what happened. You'd say it wasn't enough. And maybe on some level it wasn't. But it was something. It was proof that sometimes, even if you never see it happen, even if you never get credit for it, your quiet refusal to be small can ripple outward in ways you'll never fully understand. That night, Omari didn't mention the letter to his mom. Not because he was hiding it, but because he didn't need to. Some things lived better in silence. Instead, after dinner, he washed the dishes while Ayanna dried them, both moving in the easy rhythm of people who didn't need words to feel understood. As Ayanna wiped the last plate dry, she glanced sideways at him. "You seem lighter," she said casually. Omari shrugged, a small secret smile tugging at his mouth. "Maybe I'm..." And she smiled back, like she knew without needing to ask. Later, before bed, Omari tucked the letter into the same folder he had carried into Crestview Motors that day, the blue one, edges slightly worn, corners slightly bent. It wasn't just a folder anymore. It was a record of who he was, of what he had survived, and of the quiet victories that no one could ever take away. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, warm and steady. The world was still messy, feel unfair. It's still unpredictable. But for the first time in a long time, Omari felt something more powerful than anger. He felt hope. Not the kind you shout from rooftops. The kind you plant deep in your chest. Quiet, steady, unshakable. The kind that grows anyway. No one tries to overlook you. Session 8, the road trip that... It started with a joke. Omari was sprawled on the living room couch one Saturday morning, flipping lazily through a car maintenance manual, while Ayanna sipped coffee at the dining table, half listening to a podcast. "You know," Ayanna said over the rim of her mug, "you've got a brand new car and nowhere to go." Omari looked up, grinning. "Maybe I should take it on a real trip," he teased. "Stretch its legs a little." Ayanna arched an eyebrow. "And where exactly were you thinking?" He shrugged, half joking, half serious. "Maybe Atlanta, Georgia Tech campus. I should probably start scoping out where I'll be parking all my brilliance." Ayanna laughed, a real, easy laugh that warmed the room. Then, on a whim that surprised them both, she said, "Let's go." Omari blinked. "No." Ayanna set down her mug. "One weekend, your first road trip, my last excuse to boss you around before you officially become a college man." Omari hesitated, only for a second. Then he grinned. "You up? Want us to do it?" By noon they had thrown together a travel bag, hoodies, chargers, snacks, and were pulling out of the driveway in Omari's silver Sonata. The GPS plotted their route. Smyrna, Tennessee to Atlanta, Georgia. Just under 4 hours, depending on traffic. Plenty of time. Plenty of unspoken things between them, ready to unfold. The first hour passed in companionable quiet. Ayanna let Omari drive without micromanaging, even when he took turns a little fast or waited too long to merge. He kept her hands politely folded in her lap, the universal language of, "I'm not backseat driving, but I'm watching." Omari, for his part, was steady behind the wheel, the way he always was, observant, deliberate, cautious in a way that wasn't The radio played a low mix of R&B classics, Aretha, Marvin Gaye, Anita Baker, songs that belonged to Ayanna but somehow fit the rhythm of the road perfectly. The world outside slipped by in lazy green blurs. Rolling fields, small towns, old gas stations with peeling paint. The kind of America you don't see unless you slow down enough to notice. Somewhere past the Georgia state line, Ayanna turned the radio down. "You know," she said lightly, "when I was your age, I had a car so bad the passenger door had to be tied shut with rope." Omari laughed. "No way." "The way," Ayanna said, smiling at the memory. It was a '92 Corolla. Beige. The kind of beige that made you question if life had any color at all. Omari grinned wider. "And you chose that." "I could afford that," Ayanna corrected. "Big difference." She paused, then added more quietly. "But it got me where I needed to go. To campus, to labs, to work. And away from things I didn't need to stay around for." Omari get grama. He didn't need to. He understood. There were some roads you took because they led you somewhere. And some you took just to leave something behind. An hour later they pulled off at a small diner. They ordered burgers and fries, and milkshakes too thick to sip without serious determination. For a while they just talked about nothing: football schedules, favorite movie soundtracks, ridiculous trivia facts. But somewhere between the last fry and the final slurp of chocolate shake, the conversation shifted. Naturally, inevitably. Ayanna wiped her hands on a napkin, studying Omari for a moment. "You know," she said softly, "I wasn't sure I was doing it right." Omari frowned. "Doing what?" "Raising you," she said simply. "Giving you enough roots to stand still, but enough wings to leap." Omari stared at her, the weight of her words settling gently but firmly between them. "You did," he said quietly. Ayanna smiled then, a smile so full of relief and pride it made her look younger, softer. "I hope so," she said. They made it to Atlanta just as the sun began to dip behind the skyline, setting the glass towers and tree-lined streets ablaze in gold. Omari drove them onto Georgia Tech's campus, navigating the wide avenues and green quads with wide-eyed wonder. Ayanna watched him with a private kind of joy, the kind only a parent knows. The kind that aches even as it fills you. They parked near the student center and walked for a while, no destination, just moving. Omari pointed out buildings he recognized from the virtual tours he had watched. Ayanna listened, asking questions, letting him teach her things now. The roles shifting. When they stopped by a fountain in the center of campus, Omari leaned against the railing, staring out at the shimmering water. Ayanna stood beside him, hands in her jacket pockets. "You nervous?" she asked finally. He considered it, then shook his head. "No, real. Excited mostly. And ready." He nodded, understanding more than he said. "You'll be more than ready," she said. Another long silence stretched between them, comfortable this time. Then Omari turned to her, a little shy, a little serious. "Thanks for, believing in me before I even believed in myself." Ayanna reached up and brushed a stray curl from his forehead, the way she used to when he was small. "You made it easy," she said simply. On the drive back the next day, Omari slept most of the way, slouched in the passenger seat with his hoodie pulled up, and the soft rumble of tires on asphalt lulling him into peace. Ayanna drove, the wheels steady under her hands, the road stretching out before them like a promise. The world outside hadn't changed much. It was still messy. So unfair. But Omari had changed. And in his own quiet way he had changed the world too. One conversation. One refusal to shrink. One ripple at a time. To smile to himself, her heart full. It was what resilience looked like. Not perfect. Not painless. Not real. And still moving forward. Always forward. Session 9. The recognition he never expected. 2 weeks after the road trip, life at the Thorne house settled into a quiet rhythm again. Omari was busy finalizing paperwork for college, sorting through dorm essentials, and tinkering endlessly with a solar battery conversion project he had started in the garage. Ayanna returned to her usual whirlwind of conference calls, lab reports, and late-night coffee-fueled planning sessions. The days passed unremarkably. Until one Tuesday afternoon, when Ayanna found a letter in the mailbox. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and bore the embossed seal of a foundation she recognized immediately. The Horizon Initiative, a national nonprofit focused on mentoring and empowering first-generation college students. Ayanna's eyebrows lifted. Curious, she carried it inside and left it on the kitchen table where Omari would find it. But Omari came downstairs later that evening, tired from troubleshooting a wiring issue in his project. He spotted the envelope immediately. "I didn't apply for anything," he said, sliding his thumb under the flap. Inside was a formal letter, but it wasn't cold or impersonal. It was warm, personal, inviting. "Dear Mr. Thorne, recently we became aware of a story shared within our professional network, an account of quiet resilience, dignity, and leadership demonstrated at a local business. Your story was shared not through social media, not through public fanfare, but through word of mouth from individuals impacted by your example. In a world often driven by noise, your choice to stand with quiet strength spoke louder than you may realize. The Horizon Initiative would be honored to invite you to our annual Youth Leadership Summit this fall in Washington, D.C. We believe your experience, and more importantly your approach, can inspire countless others navigating similar journeys. All travel and accommodations will be covered. If you accept, please respond by August 15th. We look forward to hearing from you and, more importantly, to learning from you. Sincerely, Dr. Evelyn Hartman, Director. The Horizon. Omari stared at the letter. For a long time he didn't move. Ayanna watched him from across the kitchen, saying nothing. Finally he looked up, eyes wide. He started, but I only shook her head. If you discover you might not know, he told her. It didn't have to. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a gasp. But pow, Ayanna smiled. Sometimes, she said softly, when you move through the world the right way, the world moves with you. That night, Omari sat on the back porch, the cool air brushing against his skin, the letter resting in his lap. He read it 3 more times. Not because he didn't believe it, but because part of him still couldn't believe that being himself, quiet, patient, steady, had been enough to ripple outward, to reach people he had never met, to open doors he hadn't even knocked on. He thought about Crest Motors, about the man in the red polo, about the general manager who had made that painful phone call, about the receptionist who had frozen when Ayanna walked through the door. He thought about the world that had taught him to expect rejection without outrage, and about the quiet refusal he had made that day, to fight their assumptions, not with fists, but with presence. And now here he was. Not because he shouted louder, not because he demanded recognition, but because he simply refused to be less than who he was. Later, Ayanna joined him on the porch, a soft blanket draped over her shoulders, a mug of tea warming her hands. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. But after a while, quiet. I think I want to go. Ayanna smiled into her tea. I think you're already halfway there. He laughed, a soft, warm sound that floated into the night. The invitation wasn't about fame. It wasn't about compensation. It wasn't even about recognition, really. It was about impact. The kind of impact that doesn't trend on social media. The kind that moves through lives like underground rivers, quiet but unstoppable. Over the next few weeks, Omari prepared for the summit, not by rehearsing speeches or crafting points, but by sitting with his story, by owning it. Not just the polished parts, the heavy parts too. The confusion, the quiet resignation, the moment he almost believed he didn't belong, and the deeper truth underneath. He had always belonged. The world just needed to catch up. When the day finally came, Omari stood backstage at the Horizon Initiative's sleek auditorium, the lights humming softly above, the muffled buzz of 100 conversations filling the air. He wasn't nervous. Not really. He was ready. When they called his name, he stepped into the light. No music, no dramatic fanfare, just his presence, just his truth. And when he spoke, steady, unshaken, the voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. That even after the summit, Omari called home. Ayanna answered on the second. Hey, she said, voice bright. How'd it go? Omari leaned against the hotel window, staring out at the Washington skyline, lights winking back at him like distant stars. It went good, he said, grinning. Of course it did, Ayanna said, pride woven through her every word. Omari hesitated for a second, then added, Thanks, Mom. You were teaching me that I didn't have to change who I am to matter. Ayaz's voice softened. You never had to, baby. You just had to remember it when the world forgot. Outside, the night wrapped around him, solid, steady. Omari Thorne smiled to himself, feeling the weight of everything behind him. Not as a burden, but as a foundation, a quiet, indestructible foundation he would carry forward. Into Georgia Tech, into every boardroom, into every room where someone might try, one glance at a time, to erase him. And he would not bend. He would not shrink. Because he knew now, without question, his presence was enough. And the world was just beginning to catch up. Session 10, full circle, returning to Crestview Motors one last time. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Omari pulled his silver Sonata into the parking lot of Crestview Motors. The same glass doors. The same row of polished sedans catching the sunlight. But Omari was not the same. He stepped out of the car slowly, stretching a little, hands tucked casually into the pockets of his jacket. There was no anger in his chest. No tightness in his gut. Just a steady kind of peace. A presence. This wasn't a planned trip. A few weeks ago, after his talk at the Horizon Initiative, an email had appeared in his inbox. From Dan Grissom, the general manager. A simple, respectful message. If you're ever willing, we'd love for you to come speak with our staff, about your experience, about how we can keep getting better. No obligations, no expectation, just an open invitation. Omari had sat with the email for a few days. He thought about it, and then he had realized. Forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about building the future. On his terms. As Omari approached the glass doors, they slid open automatically. Inside, the lobby was quieter than he remembered. Less rushed. Less polished in a fake, shiny way. More real. A young woman at the front desk smiled warmly. "Good morning, how can I help you?" Omari smiled back. "I'm here to meet with Dan Grissom. You know what they make. Of course, he's expecting you." No confusion. No suspicion. Already the air felt different. Dan appeared from a side office within seconds, looking every bit the same but somehow smaller. He hobbled. He extended a hand immediately. "Omari," he said, genuine relief in his voice. "Thank you for coming." Omari shook his hand firmly. "Thanks for inviting me." Dan led him to a small conference room where about 15 staff members were gathered. Salespeople, finance managers, service advisors. Not a formal audience. Not a performative one. There's people. Waiting. Ready. Omari didn't begin to stand behind a podium. He didn't pull out slide. He just leaned casually against the edge of the conference table and spoke. About that day. About how it had felt. About the choices he made to walk away, to stay composed, to carry himself without giving away the hurt. He spoke about assumptions, how they build up like invisible walls long before a word is spoken. He spoke about dignity, how easy it is to strip it away with a glance, and how powerful it is to choose instead to see someone, not to pity, not to patronize, but to recognize. He didn't shout. He simply told the truth. And the room leaned in, not defensively but with the raw posture of people who wanted to be better. When he finished, there was a long, thoughtful silence. Then one of the younger salesmen, a man Omari didn't recognize, raised his hand awkwardly. "How do we fix it?" he asked, voice tight with something close to shame. "How do we make sure we don't mess up like that again?" Omari thought about it. Then he smiled, slow and sure. "You slow down," he said simply. "You listen longer than you judge. And you leave room for people to surprise you. You're not doing people a favor by seeing them fully. You're doing your job." The conversation after that flowed easily. Reflections. A few quiet apologies, not dramatic but sincere. When the meeting ended, Dan walked Omari back toward the front doors. He hesitated, then You ever think about going into leadership? Teaching? Coaching? Omari chuckled. Maybe one day, he said. Right now, I've got some engineering to finish first. Don smiled, the kind of smile that knew it was a long shot but meant it anyway. Well, if you ever change your mind, there's a place for you here. Omari shook his hand again. Thanks, Dan. But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He stepped outside, the morning sun warming his face, the soft growl of his car engine waiting patiently for him. As he pulled out of the lot, Omari glanced once in the rearview mirror. Not with bitterness. Not with regret. But with a sense of quiet closure. Crustville Motos was no longer the place where he had been overlooked. It was the place where he had left a mark, not by force. Not by rubbish. By being undeniable. By choosing not to let their vision define his vulnerability. By being seen, not as a risk or a problem or a stereotype, but as a person, a future. When Omari got home, Ayanna was trimming plants on the porch, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face. He parked golf cool. How'd it go? She called. Omari slid out of the car, stretched his arms over his head and smiled back. Better than I expected, he said. He added, almost as an afterthought. Feels good to close a chapter. Ayanna nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. Closing's good, she said, but make sure you leave it open just enough. For what? He asked. For the world to grow, she said simply. Omari laughed, that low, steady laugh that had begun to define him more and more. I'll leave the door cracked, he promised. And he'll build bigger ones. That evening, as twilight slid soft and gold over the neighborhood, Omari sat on the hood of his car, watching the sky shift from blue to purple to star-swept black. He didn't need to race ahead. He didn't need to shout. He would move through this world exactly as he always had. And the world, slowly, surely, would catch up, one ripple at a time. Because real change doesn't always start with noise. Sometimes it starts with silence, with dignity, with one young man who refused to be and chose instead to stand. Conclusion. Life lessons from Omari Thorne's journey. Omari Thorne's story isn't just about a boy in a car. It's about something much bigger. Something that ripples through every moment we live, whether we realize it or not. It's about dignity. About knowing your worth, even when the world tries to hand you something less. It's about resilience. About choosing again and again not to let someone else's small vision define your vast potential. It's about family. The kind of family that doesn't just protect you, but teaches you how to protect your spirit. The kind of mother who doesn't just pave the road, but gives you the tools to build new roads where none existed before. And it's about legacy. Not the kind written in headlines or etched into buildings. The kind written quietly, moment by moment, choice by choice, into the hearts of the next generation. Omari didn't change the world with outrage. He didn't demand it was noise. He shifted, quiet powerfully, by choosing dignity over anger, clarity over chaos, grace over bitterness. And that choice, it echoed louder than any protest.
Thank you for watching this Millionaire Love Stories today. Every love story is a journey, filled with passion, heartbreak, and unforgettable moments. And here at Millionaire Love Stories, we bring you the most captivating tales of love, wealth, and destiny. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like to support more incredible content. Comment your thoughts. Would you choose love over riches? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Millionaire Love Stories, because love knows no limits. Because love changes everything. See you in the next story.